Toss a few more logs on the fire. The night in these woods is long, and this story needs the warmth. Picture this. Dawn on the shores of one of the Great Lakes. Mist over the water. Silence so deep you can hear the pines creaking in the wind. And somewhere far off, a loon calls. Just once, and then it's quiet again. You look at the water and think it's just a lake. Deep, cold, beautiful. But then someone leans over and says, what if that isn't a relic of the Ice Age, but a footprint left by a bucket? Somewhere at the beginning of all this, there was a lumberjack. Not an ordinary one. Normal men felled a tree a day. This man did it in a single swing, then a dozen by morning. Eventually, entire groves would go down in one pass, like grass under a scythe. Forests that had grown for 200 or 300 years would vanish by lunch. And where he walked, the earth looked different, deeper, wider, as if someone hit the wrong button and the scale of the world broke forever. When he was born, his cradle was a lumber wagon. When he cried, fish jumped out of the rivers for 20 miles around. When he took his first step, the neighbors thought an earthquake had hit. His name is Paul Bunyan. If you haven't heard of him, you're not alone. If you have, you probably don't know where he actually came from. Let's get one thing straight. None of these stories claim to be the truth, but every one of them points to a real place, and that's no accident. Once, Paul was walking through Arizona. He was lost in thought. They say he was figuring out how to clear the timber in 3 states before the first snow. He walked along, dragging his axe behind him, blade down. He didn't mean anything by it. He was just tired of carrying it. His hands were full. His mind was busy. The blade sliced into the soil like a hot knife through butter, leaving a trench behind him, deeper, wider, longer. When he finally lifted the axe and looked back, the furrow was so big you could fit an entire state inside it. Now, tourists call it the Grand Canyon and pay good money to look at a tired man's mistake. The Mississippi showed up the same way. Paul was plowing a field, wanted to try his hand at farming, bet a crate of whiskey he could do it. The plow was exactly the size you'd expect. The furrow turned out so long and crooked that the water found it before he even reached the end of the field. By morning, a river was flowing there. He lost the bet, by the way, drank the whiskey, but he just wasn't cut out to be a farmer. The 10,000 lakes of Minnesota? That wasn't him. That was his ox. But we'll get to that. The Great Plains are a different story. There used to be mountains there. Good, tall mountains with snow on the peaks. But one day Paul decided to clear some space for a camp and just leveled everything that was in his way. He pushed the mountains to the side. Those became the Rockies. And where he cleared the land, there's now nothing but wheat to the horizon, with the wind moving through it like waves on the ocean. Yellowstone was his doing too. He was drilling a well. He needed water for the camp. A crew that big gets a serious thirst. He drilled too deep, hit something he shouldn't have. He just left it and went looking for a stream. Now, geysers blast 100 feet into the air every 90 minutes. Tourists take pictures, and scientists write dissertations. Paul never did find good water there. The Black Hills of South Dakota? That's just a trash heap. When he was clearing land for another camp, he piled the rocks and dirt to the side. Then he forgot to clean it up. The pile grew over, covered in forest. Bears moved in, and people declared it a monument. Just a hill, really. Puget Sound in Washington appeared because Paul needed a way to get logs to the ocean. The shoreline was shallow and inconvenient. He just scooped out the extra dirt and tossed it aside. What was left was a deep bay with perfect harbors. Now it's a major port with ferries running every hour. Nobody remembers how it started. Now, about the ox. Paul found Babe during the winter they called the Winter of the Blue Snow. It was so cold the snow actually changed color. Words froze the moment you spoke them. You had to wait until April to hear what people were arguing about in January. Rivers froze solid, not just on top, but all the way to the bottom. Birds fell right out of the sky. Paul found a calf lying in a snowdrift, blue from the cold, barely alive. He tucked him inside his shirt for 3 days, nursed him back to health, and got him on his feet. Babe grew up, but he stayed blue forever. His fur, his eyes, his breath, everything was blue. In the winter, frost misted off him. In the summer, the grass around him stayed colder than the rest of the camp. There were 42 axe handles of distance between his horns. The lumberjacks knew. If you sent a boy from one horn to the other, he'd be a grown man by the time he got there. His footsteps made the ground shake so hard the neighboring camps thought it was an earthquake. One breath and a tent would collapse. One sneeze and the whole camp would find itself in a new location. Babe's most famous feat was the road to the St. Croix. It was so crooked that lumberjacks leaving camp in the morning would run into themselves coming back in the evening and get spooked. Paul tied one end of the road to a tree and the other to Babe. The ox pulled. The road snapped straight. Sure, it stretched out a few miles, but at least you could travel it without scaring yourself. And those 10,000 lakes in Minnesota? Those are his hoof prints. The ground was soft after the rains, and the ox was heavy. The water filled those holes fast. Now people catch fish there, build cabins, and teach their kids to swim. In Bunyan's camp, everything was built to one scale. His. The kitchen griddle was so long the cooks couldn't just walk across it. They'd strap slabs of bacon to their feet and skate across the glowing surface to grease it for the pancakes. Paul ate 50 pancakes a minute. They didn't call the men to dinner with a bell. They used a steam whistle that could be heard 3 states away. Lumberjacks in the next territory knew, if the whistle blows, Bunyan's kitchen is open. Johnny Inkslinger, the clerk, went through a barrel of ink a week just keeping the camp's books. When he wanted to save money, he stopped dotting his I's and crossing his T's. He saved enough ink to buy a whole new boiler. The cook, Sourdough Sam, fed a crew of 200 men, and every one of them was roughly the same size. A little shorter than Paul, a little taller than an average tree. Once, Paul decided to wash his socks. He found a suitable river and let them soak. When he pulled them out, the valley was flooded. Now it's a marsh. It's on the maps, it has a name, but the real story only belongs to those sitting around the fire. He slept in a canyon covered by a forest. When he got up in the morning, the trees moved. Lumberjacks in distant camps just thought it was the wind. It was a tradition to compete at the campfire. Who could tell the most impossible, tall tale with a straight face? For men whose work was dangerous, monotonous, and endless, it was a way to make their lives a little bigger than they actually were. Paul Bunyan was the collective winner of those contests. His name just happened to be the one that stuck.
Now let's set our mugs down for a second. Here's what we actually know. The name Paul Bunyan first appeared in print in 1906 in a small newspaper in Duluth. A journalist named James McGillivray wrote down the tall tales he'd been hearing from lumberjacks for years. He just recorded them as a curiosity, a bit of local flavor, with no literary ambition. The character's real second life came from someone else. In 1914, an ad man named William Loghead was looking for a symbol for the Red River Lumber Company. He remembered snatches of these stories, printed some pamphlets, and drew Paul, huge, bearded, in a red flannel shirt. He gave the ox the name Babe. He invented the supporting characters. The image we know today is largely Loghead's work, not the anonymous lumberjacks by the fire. Advertising became folklore. That doesn't happen often. Whether there was a real prototype for Paul is still an open question. Some researchers point to a French-Canadian lumberjack named Fabien Fournier, massive, incredibly strong, loved a good fight, worked the camps in Michigan. Others look at the name. Bon Jean, in fast-spoken French, easily becomes Bunyan. There is no definitive answer, and there probably never will be. But here's the important part. Paul wasn't invented by one person. He's a collective character, like an internet meme, but from the age of steam engines. No one owns the copyright. Maybe that's why he never died.
Think about this. The people who came up with these stories went out every day into a forest that was bigger,
colder, and more dangerous than any of them. The woods never ended. The winter never ended. The work never ended. A tree could fall the wrong way, a river could swell, a saw could snap, and there was no insurance, no sick leave, no guarantees. So they invented a man for whom all of this was just another day at the office. A man who digs canyons by accident, to whom the forest is only knee-high, and winter is just an excuse to wear an extra shirt. The forests are cut down, but in their place are the lakes. The canyon was a mistake, but a beautiful one. The plains are just moved aside debris, but the wheat grows there to the horizon. The myth isn't about conquest. It's about how to live next to something that is bigger than you are. The fire is burning low. The mist over the water has thickened and you can't see the lake anymore. You can only hear the waves softly hitting the stones. They say Paul Bunyan didn't leave. He just moved to where the forest hasn't ended yet. To the places where the maps turn into white spots labeled "No Data." If you hear thunder on a clear day, that's him. If you find a hole by the road with no explanation, or a boulder that's sitting where it shouldn't be, or a river that curves too sharply for no reason, now you know whose work that is. Look around. Find something strange in the landscape, a hill out of place, a puddle that's the wrong size, a tree growing crooked, and make up a story. It's not hard. People have been doing it around campfires for 200 years, and they've done a pretty good job of it. Myths don't die when they stop being true. They die when they stop being needed. And Paul Bunyan still helps us explain why the world is so big.